This is Dr. Rob Harder with the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast, Making Your World Better. What does it take to be an effective nonprofit leader today? What are the biggest challenges? What are the biggest obstacles? How should nonprofits fundraise in an economy that is constantly changing? All of these reasons combined led me to start this show. And it's my hope that through this series, people can learn not only what it takes to be an effective nonprofit organization, but to hear from effective leaders who are successfully making a positive impact in their communities. We hope you enjoy the show as together we hear how they are making their world better. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast. Thanks for joining today's show. I wanted to start today by asking you a question. If you had a computer that mirrors the dashboard on your car, and when it came to the display of fundraising, what would it display today? Are you on empty? Are you on full? Are you somewhere in the middle? Are you redlining today? Regardless of your position, if you're an executive director, if you're a director of development, or you're the program director, in any role, actually, I believe, on a nonprofit leadership staff, fundraising impacts you in some way. So if you're struggling with fundraising, you don't have enough money to support your programs, or if you have a lot, either way, you're being impacted by this topic and area of fundraising. And that's the topic today we're going to really focus our time on. My guest today is Haley Cooper. She is a so-called savvy fundraiser, and I love that term, savvy fundraiser. And what we're going to talk about today is a lot of different things around this issue of fundraising. First is just what are those unique challenges that are facing nonprofit leaders today when it comes to fundraising? And then what about subscription giving? What's that all about? Is it something you should add to your nonprofit organization? As well as looking at different generations and how different generations approach philanthropy differently. And in light of that, how should we change maybe how we communicate to different generations that support our nonprofit? And then finally, how do we as nonprofit leaders continue to keep our mission and our vision in front of our donors in the midst of a 24-hour news cycle and all the other competing noise that's out there through websites and social media and just all that's going on in people's lives? How do we make sure we get in front of them so they can hear what we're about, what we're doing, the impact we're having? All those things and more are discussed with my conversation with Haley Cooper. I'm really excited to have you on the show, and thank you again for tuning in. Now on to the show. This podcast is sponsored by DonorBox. DonorBox, helping you help others with the best donation forms in the business. Welcome, everybody, to the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast. So excited to have Haley Cooper on the show. You may recognize her name and her face from the Savvy Fundraiser podcast, and she's got a lot of different things online. So, Haley, thanks for taking time to be on the show today.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here with you.
Absolutely. Well, I know you and it was fun to be on your show recently, and we talked all about, fundraising, nonprofit leadership. And so we'll dive into a lot of those things, but I really want to focus on the fundraising aspect because I think it is so important to every nonprofit leader out there. That's probably where I get the most engagement and response when we talk about fundraising, because it's an every day, every week, an ever growing challenge, I think, even today. And so let's start with that. Talk to me from your experience. And even now you've launched into, doing some consulting and doing this podcast. What do you feel like are the biggest challenges in fundraising that nonprofits are facing today?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, one of the most significant challenges I think nonprofit leaders face today when it comes to fundraising is staff turnover and finding quality staff. I think we all hear this, which I think is changing now, but nonprofits often operate with limited resources, making it difficult to attract and retain skilled professionals. And that doesn't just mean a paycheck. It could be benefits. It could be professional development. It could be mental health and well-being resources. It could be PTO, all of those things that encompass the opportunity for a person to feel supported in their role. And I think high turnover is a challenge for fundraising because as a fundraiser, I am supposed to be effective with donor stewardship and fiscally responsible for the organization's finances, right? And so if you have high turnover, that means high cost fundraising. And at the end of the day, if you're losing people, if you're not able to retain them, you're not being good stewards of your money because it costs double the amount that it needs that it to hire a new person that costs double their salary than to retain them in the first place. And so I think that is a challenge that a lot of nonprofits are facing. Additionally, I think there's a competition for top talent in the nonprofit sector, and organizations have to find innovative ways, and it doesn't have to mean money, to create appealing work environments and, like I said, offer those competitive benefits that attract and retain those staff.
Yeah, well, there's no doubt that keeping one's nonprofit top of mind and in front of supporters and donors is so important. Staff retention, so important. When it comes to this challenge of keeping your mission, your nonprofit's mission, and all that you're doing in front of donors' minds, I think it's becoming more and more difficult, right? We're in the 24-hour news cycle. We've got social media, which we were talking, before the show, talking about social media and how much it can just suck us in. And all of a sudden, next thing you know, you're scrolling for 30 minutes. And so there's so much pulling for our attention. How have you found with the interactions you've had with nonprofit leaders in your own experience, how can nonprofits effectively get their message out to donors in the midst of all these other distractions?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we're constantly bombarded with noise. We're constantly bombarded with media. And the funny thing is nonprofits say, well, these donors are receiving all these messages. We can't email. We can't send out the message because we don't want to bombard them. Specifically when it comes at year end, like, they retract from that, but you have to communicate to your donors. And one of the best ways you can learn how they want to be communicated with is ask them. Like, we're recording this during this summer, and I think sending out a donor survey is a perfect way to understand how they want to be communicated. So come when you are sending out your emails or your appeals, you can learn how your donors want to be communicated. Is it by text message? Is it by social media? They want to follow you and hear about the good work you're doing, the challenges that you're facing. Is it direct mail? We all know direct mail still works. Is it a phone call? Is it an email? Like, what ways do your donors actually want to be communicated with? And like, how can then you do a mix of traditional and digital media to communicate with your donors? I also think when you're communicating, you have to use storytelling. And this is a powerful tool to show the impact of your work. You don't just want to like share impacts of like 85% of people were lifted out of poverty. Like, what does that look like? Like, what work did you do to help uplift that person and realize their full potential? And what's their story? And also, how did your organization come alongside to support them? And so I think using storytelling in a way that can help resonate, have that emotional connection with your donors, because we all know emotional connection is first, and then we make a decision with our rational brain. And so I think so to wrap it all up, listening to your donors and understanding how they want to be communicated, then utilizing a mix of traditional and digital media to communicate with your donors, and utilize storytelling to have that consistent story that resonates with your donors.
Well said. And, I was thinking about when it comes to philanthropy, there's always seems like new things, new trends, different way people are giving. And so it's an ever changing environment, really. And so that makes it a challenge in and of itself. But particularly when it comes to how people are giving, something that's becoming more and more common is this subscription based giving. Have you run across this in the work you've done? And are people doing this more and more? And if so, talk about that a little bit. I don't hear a lot of people talking about that, but the ones who are seem to be doing pretty well with it.
So when you emailed me that question, I literally had to Google what subscription-based giving is, just to be
Okay.
transparent,
Oh, there you
because
go. Okay.
I had never
uh-huh.
heard it in that term. Typically, I hear it as monthly or recurring donations, but obviously there's multiple ways that you can talk about it. And I looked up a report on Classy that, a recurring donor, that subscription-based donor, can be over 400% more valuable compared to a one-time donor because they offer stable, reliable income for nonprofits. And donors typically have that strong appetite for subscription based donations or recurring giving, because maybe you can't give $1,000 at one time, but you can give $100 a month. And so it's a little bit more palatable, if that's a word, to give on a smaller basis, but still know that you're making that impact. And so I think there is a huge trend of getting that subscription based giving, specifically with the younger generations that are growing up and just coming into wealth, but maybe they can give a little bit and they want to be a part of a community. And so I think that's the most important piece when you're talking about this idea of recurring giving. Create that community around it. Make it explicit on why someone should sign up and like how they can be a part of that community, why it's exclusive. And I think, some of the things that you can do is, the model in itself allows donors to contribute a set amount on a recurring basis. And it offers, like I said, a nonprofit, a steady and predictable stream of income, which is obviously, and it's unrestricted, right? Like someone was asking me yesterday, well, I'm building out this recurring giving program. Should I do $20 that gives X like books to kids in our community? And I was like, well, if you say it gives books to kids, then that $20 has to be allotted for the books, technically. And so you want to make it generalized enough where people understand the impact that they're making, but it's not tied to a specific outcome, right? Like, yes, it could be part of that program that then donates books, but you don't want to make it so restrictive that then you can't utilize that, because at the end of the day, it is about raising those unrestricted funds so that you can be a little bit more agile in the way that you're able to develop your programs. And I also think to be able to set up a subscription based giving program, one, name your recurring donor group, name it. You want to optimize your donation page. And I think we both share this partnership with DonorBox, but yeah, they have a bunch of opportunities to update your online donation page and set your frequent donation page. So when you're setting it up, you can opt in for when someone goes to give a donation, the first thing it does is click monthly. And then obviously they can unclick it if they don't want to give monthly, but make that top of mind. Also create appeals around monthly giving and subscription based giving and talk about what it means and the impact that it has on your organization and those you serve.
No, I like that. That's well said. And I'm glad you gave that, more background. I think you're probably right. I'm guessing a lot of people hear subscription giving and they're not sure what is that. But yeah, you pretty much described it very well. Well, another thing I thought I would like to get your take on is they have done some studies on this, and it does seem like the generations, the way they look at fundraising, how they approach fundraising is a bit different. Here's just a couple of stats I'll just give to you that are based on, people, how they respond based on the generation group they're in. 90% of donors are willing to match giving year over year, for example. So that's just across the board. Loyal donors within that, the impact of loyal donors, basically kind of going back to your point, if they give on a regular basis, is 4 times higher than just passive donors. So if you're part of a subscription-based giving, you're going to give more often. So there's a 4x impact in your giving. Now, 59% of passive donors are searching for the next nonprofit that matched their values. And so I've read that particularly this next generation that's coming up is really looking at a nonprofit and the values they support. And that's what's going to draw them in more than slick marketing even, or even if there's a personal connection. If they connect with the values, they're going to give to that organization. And then if that's the case, if you're a passive donor, you are much more likely to give if those values match your own. And then, of course, we've had a lot of economic uncertainty. Now, there is some optimistic, some views on giving because a lot of nonprofits now are starting to create personal connections with their donors. So when it comes to this, have you seen trends where, depending on the generation of the donor that you're working with, they respond differently to how you approach them? And if so, what are some of those differences that you've seen?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think there is a shift and a difference in the generations from like baby boomers to Gen Z. And I think, like you mentioned, like Gen Z really wants to be part of social impact causes, whether that's through the corporation they're working for or looking for a nonprofit. So I think it's, again, the nonprofits can utilize a donor survey to understand the different generations' values and then get to know their passions and interests, and then how their mission aligns with those values, and then creating copy and content around that value alignment. So I think that's really important. I also think it's important specifically for like young professionals want to volunteer, they want to be part, they want to get involved in an organization, and they have more capacity to give monthly giving, whereas maybe the baby boomers are sunsetting their careers, they're going into retirement, maybe they have more opportunity for planned giving and bigger giving. And so I think it's just a different way of how you approach each generation. But at the end of the day, I think inherently how, donors across the board, it is about that value alignment and making sure no matter what the generation is, it's just how you engage them and the different opportunities that you offer, whether it's events or young professional events or volunteer opportunities for families. It's really about creating that community within each of the sector, but also across generations as well, because there's benefits there. And so, at the end of the day, I think it's really getting clear on your values, value alignment, and then how do you communicate about that to the generations to help them realize their generosity through your organization.
Oh, that's good. And I like that idea of doing a survey. Essential, just to ask your nonprofit donors now, like what do they prefer? And that could be some great data if you're listening and you haven't done a survey of your donors. I think it's a great suggestion. And then they'll give some good insight on that. We'll be right back. Are you looking for an easy and effective way to boost your nonprofit's donations? Look no further than DonorBox, the online fundraising platform that streamlines your fundraising efforts, maximizes donations, and simplifies giving for your supporters. With DonorBox, you can create beautiful donation forms, accept digital wallet payments, track donations, and send auto receipts. And the best part? There are no setup or monthly fees and no long-term contracts required. So what are you waiting for? Visit donorbox.org today to get started. That is donorbox.org. Hey, friends, and thanks so much for listening to the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast. I want to let you know that I've recently become a professional certified coach. With my nearly 30 years of nonprofit experience, I know firsthand how hard you work as a leader. I also know how important it is to have someone you can call on to get help with the barriers, the leadership challenges that you will face both professionally and personally. And I really want people to thrive, to become all they were meant to become by providing coaching and consulting services. So if coaching is something you've always been interested in, but maybe weren't quite sure what it was all about, I encourage you to reach out. You can go to my website, robharder.com, or just email me at rob@robharder.com. I would happy to provide a free sample coaching session so you can determine if coaching is for you. All right, thanks again for tuning in. Now back to the show. So let's move on to social media. I know this is not necessarily one of your primary focus areas, but yet you are involved on a regular basis. We talked about LinkedIn for both of us is a great place for engagement. What have you found when, particularly for nonprofits, say that have a limited budget, for spending and or hiring for the area of social media and website development, specifically for fundraising? What is the best approach from your experience? Is it, a multi-channel approach? Is it really leaning into one, like say LinkedIn or Instagram or TikTok even? Like what have you found to be the most effective way to utilize social media for one's nonprofit?
Yeah, like we said offline, I'm a savvy fundraiser, not a savvy marketer. So before I share my
Okay,
experience,
good
I just want to
distinction
say
there.
I am not an expert, but obviously fundraising and marketing go hand in hand. There are distinctions between the two, but most of my career I've been tagged as a marketer because people think fundraising. Anyways, I think when it comes to social media and the limited resources that nonprofits have, you have to choose one or two platforms. I would probably say one and start there. So again, get to know where, and there's different purposes for each. Like LinkedIn is a great place to build your thought leadership and connect with corporations and foundations. Instagram and Facebook have a whole nother purpose. And so I think it's getting clear on what your goals and strategies are for your organization, and then choosing one or two platforms that you can do really well. Because if you don't have the capacity to record videos and post them on TikTok, like if you post content sporadically, like there's no point in that, right? People are going to see that you don't have the energy to be able to do it because it's not going to reflect in your content. So I would get really clear on what your strategies and goals are, and then how social media can align with elevating that or building those connections. I also think social media is more than just posting. It's about engaging with your community and offering engagement opportunities. So whether, we were talking about, obviously I'm a consultant, but I've used LinkedIn. I had a coach, Tanya Bhattacharya from Lumos Marketing, who taught me about this idea of social impact selling, where it's not just about people liking my content. It's about engaging with them on social media, sending them a DM, telling them I'm here, I'm cheering them on. And I've really been able to build that community on LinkedIn that then leads to other opportunities. And I think nonprofits can do the same, because people are not just looking for likes anymore. I think it's more the value is with that engagement. And I think that's across the board with fundraising, right? But I think it's to, again, prioritize that quality over quantity. And, when you're utilizing these platforms, there's a bunch of free tools and resources. It doesn't have to be expensive. And you can use social media scheduling platforms to streamline your efforts and make sure that your message is consistent across all platforms. And again, engage with your audience through comments, messages, and interactive posts. You can do polls on LinkedIn. I just did one today that can enhance your presence. And then I also think you can collaborate with influencers or other organizations, or if you're partnering with corporations, to really build that brand awareness.
Yeah. I like what you're sharing here, and maybe you can go a little bit more into this. Double click on that idea of engaging with your followers, so to speak. You've DM them, you reach out to them. So maybe talk more about that. Is it simply just reaching out to them separately? Is it when you post something and someone likes it or whatever, you immediately respond to them? Talk a little bit more about what has been most effective for you to really move from just posting content, hoping for a like you said, to engaging with them. I think there's a big difference. And so tell me more what you've learned along those lines.
Yeah, so I've done a few things. So one, I've been following people that I really aspire to be or I like and I want in my sphere of influence, and then I engage with their posts, I comment, I like, and that leads to a relationship where we get curious about each other because now we have this mutual following. So if you have like a donor or someone or a corporation on LinkedIn that you want in your sphere of influence, I would start interacting with them, commenting, liking, and also, I will post something if someone likes it, or let's say they voted on my poll. I will send them a DM again saying, thank you for liking my post. I look forward to supporting. Thank you for being in my network. I look forward to seeing how we can support one another. And it's not just like I get these emails all the time on LinkedIn, like the ones in my DM where it's like they've literally read my profile once and they've sent like, here's what I can offer you. And, those sales ones. And it's just icky, right? It's not relationship based. And I'm like, why do you think I need, like, based on me being a young professional, why do you think I need like wealth management services, right? Like, that's not like what I'm thinking about. Like, really building that unique, I think authenticity, while social media, can feel inauthentic, there is a way to build that authenticity and build that relationship that then opens the conversation for people to get curious, to learn more about you, to learn more about your organization. And once you start to, engage with each other through comments, through interactive posts, through DMing them, that can lead to sending them a link, to sending them, hey, we're having this opportunity, we're having this event. I would love for you to attend. You seem like the perfect fit. I've got to know your values. And so that's how it can lead to further engagement.
No, well said. Okay. Thank you for explaining that a little bit more for my listeners and for me even. That's just a great thing to learn what you have really found to be effective in that area. Because I do think you're absolutely right. People are moving and shifting in the way they use social media and the way they consume social media. So some great insights there. Okay. Fundraising, again, just in general, kind of in the big picture here, in your opinion, with all that you've been doing, all your experience, when it comes to fundraising today, do nonprofits need to fundamentally just change the way they're doing fundraising? And if so, what are the biggest and most important changes that nonprofit leaders should make?
So I think, like I said, I posted a poll today on LinkedIn about what is the biggest thing that is keeping people from individual giving. Because those are the conversations that I have all the time with nonprofits that somehow now 30 years in, they want to start engaging individuals and they haven't yet. And it's a lack of education and a lack of resources. And so I think for nonprofit leaders, that yes, you might have limited resources, but there's opportunities to utilize technology for good and streamline your processes while still making it personalized to your community. So we all know that you could say, hey, Haley, I'm so glad you're here in my network on an email. And it makes, or like in a text message, right? Like, hey, Haley, thank you for giving. Like, I still feel personalized rather than like, hey, nonprofit supporter, or even in your appeals. Like, you can streamline technology. And let's say I gave $50 and you can then ask in the next donation appeal for me to give 100, or ask based on what my giving history is. And so I think when you think of limited resources, like, invest in technology and then learn how to utilize it well. You learn how to utilize your CRM, like we talked about donor box, utilize how you utilize your donation pages, and then you can streamline it so that it takes the load off of you. Yes, there might be an investment in the front end, but I promise you it is worth it, because when your donors feel connected, when they feel like they're communicated, when you understand your donor preferences and donor history, you can engage in a more meaningful way. You can raise more revenue. And so I think if you have not done it, like, you need to invest in technology. You also, when you're, like I said, investing in technology, tailor your communications and engagement efforts. Talk to your people. Like, there's, I mean, in nonprofits, there's a 40% retention rate, right? And only 19% for first time donors and 40%. So you're doing all this work to acquire new donors, and only 19% are going to give again. And so the main reasons why people don't give is because they're not asked, and they're not thanked, and they're not communicated the impact. And so you have to send out emails, whether it is monthly, quarterly, whatever it is. Don't wait until year end to start asking people for money, because come January 1st, you're going to have to start the cycle again. And so again, there's so many email marketing platforms that you can utilize. I also think, again, with that impact piece, transparency and accountability. When it comes to fundraising and also foundations, a lot of nonprofits have to report on outcomes, right? And maybe we didn't deliver on our outcomes. But that transparency and accountability piece is so important, because if you think about 2020, 2021, we all went into 2020 with this great strategic plan, these goals that we thought we were going to carry out. And then the pandemic hit and our worlds shifted. Everything shifted. And maybe we didn't meet our goals that year because the changes in our community shifted. But that's an opportunity to invite people into that conversation and say, hey, we might not have met these goals, but this is why. And this is how you can invest in us in the future to actually meet those goals. And it's okay to fail. Obviously, we want to be able to meet those goals, but that's an opportunity, like I said, to invite people into that conversation and see how then you can pivot, how you can be more agile, and how people can invest in that future to really meet the community needs. And lastly, I will just say, like I said, a lot of nonprofits that I talk to have never done individual giving. But like we were talking about subscription based giving, it's really important to diversify your revenue streams, because if you have heavily relied on government grants, those are so restricted, and you can't really listen. Like, if you're listening to the community needs, from my own experience, like, you have to stick with what the government grant says. And even if the community is changing, you can't really change your programs. And so diversifying your revenue streams helps more reliable income, but also allow you to opportunities to scale and grow in ways that are actually meeting your community needs.
Yeah, I really like the idea of inviting people into a conversation. I think that is well said. I think it's so critical, connecting personally, relationally, and authentically. Okay, so you've got your podcast, Savvy Fundraiser, and you've had a lot of experience. You've got your own organization. So for people that are listening, first time they've heard of Haley Cooper, how can they connect with you, and how can they find out more about all that you provide?
Yeah, so my business is a Savvy Fundraiser. My podcast is Lead with Heart, but they go hand in hand. So obviously, like we talked about on LinkedIn, you can find me LinkedIn. I'm wearing this coat, blonde hair. You can't miss me, Haley Cooper. And that's where I like to engage. I have an Instagram. It's more sporadic, so you can join me there if you like Instagram. Again, I kind of utilize the same strategy and really like building relationships, thesavvyfundraiser.com. And then also check out the Lead with Heart podcast.
Perfect. Well, again, Haley, you've got a lot going on, but thanks so much for joining us on the show. And thanks for all the insights you share when it comes to how you can get more effective and fundraising for your nonprofit. Thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Rob.
Hey friends, well, I wanted you to know that this podcast can be found on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, Google Podcasts, and wherever you listen to other podcasts. I also want to encourage you to like, subscribe, and share this podcast with others. This will actually help us get this great content out to more nonprofit leaders just like you. You can also join the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast community. Find other resources and interviews of past guests all on my website, nonprofitleadershippodcast.org. Well, thanks again for listening, and until next time, keep making your world better. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast. Go to YouTube and look up Nonprofit Leadership Podcast. We'll see you there. This podcast is sponsored by DonorBox. DonorBox, helping you help others with the best donation forms in the business.